Hello everyone, welcome to Advanced Planning and Control Week 3. This week we are still talking about procurement. We will focus on conducting procurement, negotiation, and types of contracts. Conducting procurement is a process to obtain seller responses, selecting a seller, and then awarding a contract. It's very important in this process to align expectations of both internal and external stakeholders to establish agreements. We use different tools and techniques, and we start with inputs. The procurement management plan, the procurement documentations, selection criteria, seller proposals, other project documents, the decisions that we took to make or buy or rent or lease, procurement statement of work, and also organizational process assets. And these are any knowledge or documentations that we have in our organization or business that can support this process. And we use different tools and techniques. We use bidder conference, proposal evaluation techniques, independent estimates, expert judgment, advertising, analytical techniques, procurement and negotiations. Then comes the output of the procurement process. We have a list of selected sellers, we have agreements, we have contracts, we have resource calendars, change requests if there are some changes, project management plan updates, and project documents updates. So the flow of the process of conducting procurements will include different steps. So this week we will learn how to negotiate the contract and the prices, how this negotiation will result in reasonable risk and provides the seller with incentive to perform in an efficient and economic way. We will learn how can we request seller responses. We will learn how to obtain bids or proposals from sellers. We will learn how to evaluate bids or proposals, how to award the contract, and we will focus on negotiation. There are three techniques or methods that are common in requesting seller responses: advertising, negotiation, small purchases. During the process of project management, the project manager and the team, they might seek out different sellers, whether these are from our preferred sellers or sellers that we have never dealt with before. And to solicit this information from the seller, we need a controlled process of requesting seller responses. The information that we are seeking in this process may consist of any type of information. It comes in a shape of proposals, quotations, estimates, updates, technical specifications, offers, and bids or bidding results. We usually have a form of written request to seek out this information. We might send it via email or traditional mail. We might use advertising, and advertising is a common method to communicate with potential sellers, because we need a method to inform potential sellers that we are seeking information regarding certain parts or certain services that we are procuring. And there are common approaches to advertising. Whether we use trade publications or other publications that we think that it will reach potential sellers, or we use online communities, or we use other websites that will facilitate the reach or the approach to potential sellers. And also we need to decide on our approach to negotiation. And this process could be lengthy and costly. It depends on the complexity of the project. There are four approaches that we might select, one or two or more approach to negotiation. The first one is the request for information, RFI, request for proposal, RFP, request for quote or quotation, RFQ, invitation for bid, IFB. Requests for information we use this in many situations when we are seeking out information by individuals or by corporations or businesses. We can see this a lot in the context of governmental requests for information. And we might see government agencies advertise requests for information in official publications or trade publications. In the context of project management, request for information refers to a particular form of procurement document. In this document, the respective buyer or purchaser or the project manager places a formal request of a potential seller or a group of sellers or a service provider or a contractor with a series of specifications or specific information in relation to the project, whether it's in terms of services or products. We might also have request for information with another method or another way, like request for quotation. So we seek information, but also we need a quotation, or we seek an estimate request. The second approach is request for proposal. And usually we use request for proposals when we have a good idea about what we need, but we might not have a solid idea about the perfect solution. So we might have some questions. We might articulate what's our goal. So the vendors or the sellers, they can provide us with their point of view on how to solve this problem or how to meet this goal, and they send us their proposal that might answer some of our questions. In requests for proposals, we might have a good idea about the problem and we need a solution for this problem or opportunity, and we don't understand or we cannot solve it 100% or understand how to solve it 100%, and we solicit ideas from different vendors, and we do this in a formal way, and we seek detailed proposals so we can compare the capability of different vendors on providing the solution that will satisfy our need. The third approach is request for a quote or a quotation. Requests for quotations are similar to requests for proposals. They are a way or a tool or a mechanism that we can utilize to solicit more information and proposals and quotation from the seller. And sometimes we use the request for quotation like we use the request for an estimate. So we need the vendor to provide us with a quote or an estimate of the service or the product that they will provide. And to use request for quotation, we must understand and know exactly what we want, so we don't have many questions unanswered. The fourth approach is invitation to bid. And here the main focus is on price. So we have many vendors who have the ability to satisfy our needs, but the price here is a crucial factor in differentiating and assessing these vendors. In this case, we provide vendors or potential sellers with a detailed specification list and the work condition and our needs. And this could be a very comprehensive document. This might include the project scope, the duration, the minimum qualifications, the mandatory standards, and the required warranties, and other technical specifications as needed. And here, all the vendors who can satisfy these needs can bid on price. Whether we issued a request for proposals or invitation for bid, now it's time to select sellers. We might receive a huge number of proposals and quotations or a small number of proposals. Anyway, we have to follow certain steps. We have to set selection criteria, and we will use these selection criteria when evaluating sellers. And where we can find selection criteria, it will be included in the procurement plan. And we might choose a certain way to set selection criteria, for example, weighted scoring model. There are common selection criteria that might be in almost all projects, in addition to a specific list of selection criteria depending on the project. The common selection criteria like time, cost, and also the history of that vendor in fulfilling orders. In selecting sellers, we might have a committee, a selection committee. The selection committee consists of the project stakeholders, project manager, sponsor, key stakeholders, procurement experts, some team members who can provide us with expert judgment. In selecting sellers, we might do or perform proposal evaluation, and we use different techniques. Of course, we have simple projects and we have much more complicated projects, and the degree of project complexity will affect the how thorough the evaluation process will be. So after soliciting responses from the sellers or the potential sellers, we might follow a specific technique like weighted criteria, and we engage in a formal evaluation process, and we have to include this formal process in our procurement plan. The committee will compare different proposals or different bids depending on the approach that we used, and we adhere to a number of rules in selecting sellers. Of course, the comparison will be easier if all the offers or the proposals are similar. That's why we need this type of structured process to facilitate the decision making and make it easier for the committee to quickly compare between different vendors and reach the right decision. And as I said before, we select sellers depending on criteria, and as we have common criteria that we might be in almost all projects, we might have other criteria, like of course the purchase price, understanding of project's needs. So vendors will differ in conveying to the committee, the selection committee, how thorough their understanding of our situation, our needs, and our problem. We might take into consideration the overall or the life cycle cost of the service or the product. So we have the cost of the purchase plus operating costs. We also might take into consideration the technical capability and approach of the vendor. And there's a huge criteria lies in risk and risk management. Who will take the risk? Who is able to take that risk? And the final approval in a more complex, high value, high risk project, and of course the related procurement, will require senior management approval. Our committee, our selection committee, might take the decision or give recommendations to the senior management, who in turn will take the final approval decision. As we are talking about a structured process here, we have to document all the steps along the way. We might have other considerations and we included in the selection criteria, like financial capacity, production capacity, and interest. Some vendors, they might have the capacity to provide what we need, but they might not have the interest to dedicate that much of their capacity to us. Business size also might play a role. Past performance, references, intellectual property rights, proprietary rights. These are all criteria or representative standards that we will use when selecting the best seller. That's why it's very important to outline these criteria in our procurement plan as clear as possible, because we will use it to compare and gauge the performance of different sellers and to assess their proposals. One of the popular techniques to compare different sellers is weighted scoring model. In this model, we give each criteria a weight, depends on the importance of this criteria in the assessment process. Now comes the turn of negotiation. Negotiation can include more than just the contract price. For example, it might include inclusions and exclusions for the work needed, the type of contract, the length of contract, timing, quantity or quality of deliverables, any warranties, the payment schedule, the ownership of intellectual property. In some cases, negotiation could be very complex process that include different aspects of this dealing and the relationship between the project manager and their teams as the buyer and the seller. Our end goal in the negotiation is to create favorable terms for our company and have a win-win situation with the seller. We might also go into a negotiation process when we have a contract that's ended and we need to renew the contract for another period. In negotiation, we might negotiate the price, the fairest price, the payment schedule and terms, the delivery or the production schedule, the quality standards. Also, throughout the negotiation, we need to build a stronger relationship with the seller. It's very important to make sure that we cover all the aspects that we need to cover throughout the negotiation. So in negotiation, vendor relations are critical and core. Having good relationship with the seller can shorten the negotiation time and can ease the negotiation process. And we take into consideration 3 factors that can affect our negotiation: ability to compromise, adaptability, and good faith. We have to start with a negotiation strategy. In this strategy, we need to understand the seller. What is the right approach to negotiation? What are the valuable information that we need to seek or to know or to understand to assess our position in the negotiation process? And also, how much compromise I can take. So, for example, I might not have the shortest time, but I will get a better price. We all need to understand how we can have good negotiations. Good negotiations take place when the parties, the buyer and the seller, plan and develop the objectives, minimum and maximum positions, to evaluate the other party, to define the negotiation strategy and tactics, to gather facts, to perform a complete analysis that's based on the price or the total cost, and also to arrange what is called hygiene factors. For example, where the negotiations will take place, at what time, what will be the seating arrangements for meetings. There are a lot to be mentioned in negotiations. We need to set objectives for negotiations, and we should include a number of factors that we need to consider or take it into consideration when we perform the negotiation, like cost, value for money, payment terms and conditions, delivery time, quality standards, any technical standards, aftercare, warranty, maintenance terms, the life cost, the lifetime cost for the product or the service. And we include this list in our negotiation strategy. And we decide how critical these different factors on our negotiation. And again, this leads to the compromise, how much we can compromise on a specific criterion. And in negotiation, we have also to consider the benefits that the other party will gain, because at the end, we want to maintain our relationship with the seller. It's very important to understand what will affect the negotiation strategy or tactics. For example, what is the maximum that we can pay? And what is the minimum that the seller can accept? And also, what is the underlying motivation for both the buyer and the seller? What is the strategic intent of the project? In the negotiation strategy, we consider our priorities, our objective, the degree that we can shift or compromise, the minimum and the maximum that we can accept for each objective or each criteria. And also because negotiation includes some sort of argument, so we have to organize our arguments. What's the strength points or the weakness points that can affect our argument? And at the end, our end goal here is to negotiate the best contract for us with and being fair to the seller at the same time. So contract negotiation may be a separate process involving lawyers or procurement department with the team or the project team. And there are 4 stages of negotiation. We prepare, we exchange information, we bargain, and then we reach a closure, and we close and commit. And contracts are binding documents between different parties. And this binding document is an agreement that includes terms and conditions. Terms and conditions in any contract should be detailed and very clear. So we don't have surprises along the way. We don't have future situations that will affect how the project will run. The contract might include clauses that covers cost, specific features, timelines, and deliverables, and any information that needs to be very specific in the contract. Throughout the negotiation process, the actual negotiation, we need to start with the positive side. Okay, we might have some terms that we are okay with these terms, so we start with this. We are okay with clause number 1, 5, 6. And then we recall those items that we are partially agreeing with the terms of this specific clause. And we don't start by showing how we can compromise. You know, you are working for your company, so the benefit of the company should be your best interest. And then we might have an offer and we have to counter offer, and we go into this process of offering and counter offering several times before reaching the situation that satisfies both parties. And negotiation is not a process to exert your power. Remember, our end goal is to maintain our relationship with the seller and have a good faith. So we have to tackle negotiation in a smart way. After negotiations are done, we have what is called the pre-negotiation critique. And we have 2 critiques. The first critique is internal to the project and the company. The second critique is with all the losing bidder. We need to explain to the other sellers or other vendors who we did not select why they didn't win the contract. No matter how the outcome of the negotiation is, we have to assess the negotiation process. That's why we conduct post-negotiation assessments. So the project manager has to brief the team and all the parties that were included in the negotiation team, like lawyers or personnel from the procurement department or other technical personnel from the company, and the project manager brief them on the negotiation process about the outcome of the negotiation. And this can make the company build a mature process and increase the skills of negotiation. So we might ask ourselves, did we have a well-designed negotiation strategy? Were we well prepared for the negotiation? Did we have enough time in planning? Were there critical information that we missed? How about the process we have to gather information? And here we don't only include the negative points or outcomes, we also need to include the positive outcomes. And we might assess the locus of control. What are the elements that were under our control or within our circle of influence, and what are the elements that were outside of our control, and what we can do about these elements in the future. Now, let's discuss types of contracts. Preparing the contract. Final contracts are. Now, let's discuss types of contracts. Preparing the contract. Final contracts are definitive contracts. They are binding. So we need to engage in a process to prepare the final contract, and also to engage in negotiating and preparing it for signature. And this preparation might take months and long time. So in case that we need to start working before we finalize the contract, we sign something called letter of intent. In this letter of intent, we set some temporary conditions until the definitive contract is signed. The preparation process might include dealing with some disputes or disagreements, conducting consultations, and we can do this through formal or non-formal negotiations. For example, we might have discussions regarding some technicalities or some terms, or we might have a structured process to resolve conflicts. While we are doing negotiation, we might need skills in contract management, in stakeholders management, and in conflict management. And we do contract negotiations through different steps: planning, discussing, proposing, and reviewing. And all this might affect the type of contract that we will choose for a specific purchase or procurement. So to decide on the type of contract, we need to take into consideration the overall degree of cost and schedule and risk, type and complexity of the requirement. We call it technical risk, the extent of price competition, the urgency of the requirements, the cost price analysis, the period that we need this specific procurement to be fulfilled, the seller responsibility and risk, any other contracts that are in place that might interfere with the work, and also how much work will the seller outsource. And also in many situations we might start with a certain type of contract, and throughout the negotiation we reach a different type of contracts. That's why we need to identify the critical factors that will help us to determine the best contract type for this job. And throughout the procurement preparation, we might have a contracting plan included in our procurement strategy. We think of the uncertainty of the scope of work. We think who will take the risk of unexpected costs, or the increase or deviations or variation in costs. Also the schedule risk. So how important it is to meet the scheduled milestones, the predictability of the costs. That's why we have different contracting approaches and different contract types that can support different project environments. And we have generally two types of contracts: fixed price contracts and cost reimbursable contracts. In fixed price contracts, the price is agreed upon in advance, and it remains fixed throughout the procurement cycle unless there are scope changes or changes to other agreement provisions. And the price, as I said, fixed and known throughout the procurement process. And in this type of contracts, the risk is with the seller. In cost reimbursable or cost plus contracts, the seller is reimbursed for all or some of the expenses incurred during the performance of the contract, whether it's material, labor cost, travel cost, and in some types we add a plus plus an additional fee for the seller's profit. In many cases, it's a percentage of the total costs. In cost plus contracts, price is unknown until the project is complete and the risk is with the buyer. And these types have different subtypes or variations. The fixed price contract is a legal agreement to provide goods and services at an agreed on price, and this price is fixed throughout the project. Usually the scope of work is clear and it is not likely to change, and the cost is highly predictable. The risk and the responsibility to manage the work is on the seller. And for the project team, we track the quality and the schedule of the work, and the schedule also of the delivery of goods and services. So in case there is a variation of the cost, the seller will bear this variation. But if any changes we do to the scope, we will carry this risk. In fixed price contracts, we have fixed total cost contract, and we have fixed price contracts with price adjustment. This happens when the project life cycle is long, and there might be some factors like inflation, for example, that might affect the price. At this time, we include in our fixed price contract some clauses that can include inflation adjusted price. In cost plus or cost reimbursable contracts, the organization or the business or the buyer that we represent as a project manager agrees to pay the seller for the cost performing the service or providing the goods. And we use this type of contracts when the scope of work or the costs for performing the work are not well known. So we have allowable expenses related to the work, and we pay these expenses to the seller. That's why when we have cost plus contracts, we need to document the work to the highest degree. So we make sure that we are paying exactly for the work that we received. And also under cost plus contracts, we have variations. We have cost reimbursable contract with a fixed fee. We have cost reimbursable contract with a percentage fee. And we have a cost reimbursable contract with an incentive fee. In case of cost reimbursable contract with a fixed fee, we give the seller a fee or a profit amount that's determined at the beginning of the contract, and this fee is fixed. In the type of contract, it's a cost reimbursable contract with a percentage fee. We pay the seller cost plus a percentage of the costs, and we agree on this percentage, and we link it to allowable costs. So for example, we pay 5% on top of the reimbursable costs, the allowable reimbursable costs. The cost reimbursable contract with an incentive fee, we use this type of contract to encourage performance, to encourage excellence in these areas that are so critical to the success of the project. So it's a type of motivating the contractor or motivating the seller. And usually we have this incentive when cost reduction happens. We also have cost reimbursable contract with award fee, where reimburse the seller for all allowable costs, plus a fee that is based on specific performance criteria that we specify in the contract. And also we have some contracts that is called time and material. These contracts, usually it's a small, related to small activities. We track the time and we reimburse the time and the materials used to perform certain services. And we might add extra percentage and as a fee on top of time and material. How to choose the best Contract type. Let's talk about fixed price. In fixed price contract, seller must be careful when estimating cost and schedule, because the price cannot be changed later, because the price is fixed throughout the contract term. If the seller overestimates the price, they might lose the bid. Underestimating may cause the seller to have little or no profit. Fixed price contracts preferred by both parties when the scope of work is well defined, costs are predictable, low implementation risks. For example, when providing parts with specific specifications, and these specifications are clear and well documented for a machine, or when delivering a training program, for example. In these projects, they're less concerned with the project costs, and there are fewer change requests. Fixed price contracts have some advantages as well as some disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages is run the risk of underestimating by the seller, can have serious financial consequences on the seller. More complex and costly to prepare, because specifications must be very clear and well understood in advance to avoid the risk of underestimating or overestimating. It gives the seller incentive to use cheaper material, increase their profit. That's why in many cases we use incentive clauses as the variations of fixed price contracts that I mentioned before, like fixed price with price adjustment or fixed price with incentive fees. The disadvantages of cost plus contracts is that it has little incentive for the seller to control its costs or finish on time, because they are, think of this, they are paid based on time or allowable costs. However, sellers who want to maintain their reputation and to secure future contracts, they might control their costs to secure future contracts. And even in cost plus contracts, buyers can use incentive clauses for sellers to control costs, to maintain performance, to stay on schedule. And here we have to focus on the allowable costs. So these are the costs that have accrued by the seller in commission of the service or the delivery of the product. And we have some baseline costs and expenditures to be reimbursed. So by using incentives, we can keep the costs as low as possible, because it will be the benefit of the seller. It's the interest of the seller to maintain their reputation and secure future work. So they keep the costs as low as possible. They will finish the work according to schedule or even earlier. Based on the type of the project, the type of service or product that we are procuring, and also the risk tolerance or risk allowance, or how much risk we are able to take, we can decide on the best type of contracts for the something that we are procuring.